Hello and welcome to the Music Professor channel. I'm Matthew King and I'm here with my wonderful assistant Loki, who is sitting there with his chew. Today's video is about a wonderful, very exciting, rare piece by Mozart, an Infinite Canon, which he composed in 1782. And we'll get onto that in a minute. First of all, I just want to say, if you like what we do, then like and subscribe. And if you want to receive notifications, press the little bell. And if you're feeling generous, and this channel is entirely reliant on your generosity, please consider donating. And you can do that via various possibilities that are listed in the video description. You can even become a patron and join our wonderful, generous patrons. And also, I should say, thank you to those of you who already generously donate to the channel. We simply wouldn't be able to function without your generosity, so thank you. So let's talk about Mozart. A couple of weeks ago, we had a video on this channel about the D minor Fantasia, which was composed in 1782. And I talked about the fact that 1782 was a tumultuous year for Mozart. He came to live in Vienna, he went freelance, he got married, and he managed to offend everybody in Salzburg, his hometown, including the Archbishop, who had dismissed him from his employment, and he also offended his dad, Leopold. So there are all sorts of tensions and issues. It was a tumultuous year. And in that year, Mozart composed the D minor Fantasia, which we featured on the channel, and check out in the video description below. I will put the details of that video and you can have a look at it. It's a wonderful piece which he left unfinished, and in that video I proposed an alternative ending to the one that is commonly played. And today we're looking at another piece that is in a sense unfinished because it's infinite. So it isn't really unfinished, but it doesn't have an end. It goes on, circling forever. And what is an infinite canon? So a canon is like a round, for those of you who don't know what a canon is. It's like a round like Frere Jacques or Row the Boat, the round where the voices come in one after another. A canon is essentially that. And an infinite canon is very like a round because it goes round and round in circles. What makes this infinite canon sort of extraordinary is that each voice comes in on a different pitch. So in Frere Jacques or Row the Boat, they all come in on the same pitch and it sort of circles around the same harmony. So what can happen if you're super clever is you can start with the first voice here, and then the second voice can come in on another pitch, and the third voice on another pitch, and so on. And so you've got the tune in various transpositions and they're all circling around, but you've got to be super clever because working out the counterpoint of those voices with those different changes in pitch for each entry is very, very challenging. Not challenging for Mozart because he had a super brain and he was sort of like he was a musical genius and he was a prodigy, and not all prodigies are like Mozart. People say on the channel, and I get so many comments on Mozart, and I notice he divides the room. You know, some of you absolutely love him and revere him. Others think that the whole Mozart thing is a bit glib and that it's a sort of mythology. People think that it's the story of Mozart's prodigy that has maintained his fame. That's absolutely not the case. History is full of dozens, thousands of prodigies. Prodigies are a dime a dozen, but Mozart is extraordinary because the great thing about Mozart, right, I'm going to get on my high horse now. The great thing about Mozart isn't that he was a child prodigy. I mean, he was a spectacular child prodigy, but that's not the thing that makes him a great composer. The thing that makes him a great composer is that when he was about 20, he started to transition from being a very, very clever child, capable of producing all sorts of wonderful, precocious and clever pieces. But he transitioned into being a great composer. The music takes on a depth and a richness. I would say around the time of his 9th piano concerto when he was 21, sometimes called the young man concerto, the jeune homme piano concerto. And in that piece, you suddenly realize here's a composer of incredible depth and expressivity, and the balance of the form and the richness of the writing and the absolute perfection of the way that everything is structured, the interrelationship of the orchestra and the piano, all of this is sort of a miracle, but it's the expressive depth, the warmth of the music that is so fantastic. So I would say the miracle of Mozart isn't that he was a child prodigy, but that he was able to transition from being the smart aleck kid, admittedly with an unbelievably good ear, but a smart aleck kid, and he transitioned from that to being an artist of gravity and substance and real depth. And therefore, for me, he only died at 35, but he achieved as much in his 35 years as any artist in history. So Mozart is, for me, on a Shakespearean level. People often say, and many of the comments say, well, he's not as good as Bach, or he's not as good as Beethoven. Of course he is. He's as good as those composers, and in some respects better than either of them, because he's a great opera composer. So he's a great dramatist as well as a great composer. So feel free to disagree with that, but the work speaks for itself. Here's a composer of Shakespearean stature. And the piece we'll look at today is very, very interesting for those of you who think that Mozart's just a kind of glib composer. He really isn't. I think there's something connected to this wonderful piece. Now, I love all Mozart. I love that piece, which I was playing rather slowly. But that's his beautiful C major piano sonata written quite late in his career for children. He very specifically said on the score, sonata for young people. In other words, it's a sonata for beginners. Hence, the didactic nature of the material. Scales and arpeggios. It's also full of arpeggios and scales. That's essentially what the material of that piece is. In fact, the miracle of that little piece is that it's really just an exercise piece that is also a fabulous piece of music and a sonata in fully worked out sonata form. So it's kind of fantastic. But if you're saying that that is archetypal Mozart, as people often seem to think it is, with its Alberti bass and its simple tunes, well, I'm sorry, but it isn't. Mozart's genius is far deeper than that. And keep watching, because today I'm going to show you this canon. So this canon shows you just how deep and rich Mozart's musical language could be, because it's a 4-voice canon, which he wrote in 1782. And by the way, why was he writing canons? Okay, why is he suddenly writing canons? In 1782, he went to live in Vienna, and there was a guy living in Vienna. I mean, Mozart was very good at networking and getting to know people, and he'd already met as a travelling child prodigy. He'd already met this guy. His name was Baron van Swieten, and he was a high official in the court of the Emperor of Austria. He was also in charge of the Imperial Library, so he was considered a scholar. He was also a sort of amateur composer and a huge fan of music, but in particular of Baroque music. Now, this is very fascinating because Baron van Swieten is a hugely important figure in the history of music, and I'll explain why. In his library, Baron von Swieten had a whole bunch of manuscripts by Bach and Handel and other Baroque masters. Baroque music in the second half of the 18th century was not particularly fashionable. This is very important to remember. In the 1730s, a new musical style had emerged, and the philosopher Rousseau had been part of this. He'd been arguing for a simpler style where you had natural, free melody accompanied by uncluttered, open textures. So the idea was that music needed a sort of simplification. We all want to hear melodies with simple accompaniments, away with the fugues and the complex old forms, the concerto grossos, the oratorios and so forth, the fussy old wigs, away with it all. Let's have a more natural style, the style galant. And this style emerged very prominently, for example, with J.S. Bach's sons, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach and Johann Christian Bach, who went to live in London and was a friend of Mozart when he was a little boy. When Mozart arrived in London, he met Johann Christian Bach and closely studied his piano sonatas. In fact, he turned them into little tiny piano concertos. Really fascinating. That's for another video, actually. But the interesting thing is, do you see, it was Bach's songs that interested Mozart when he was little. But when he got older, he got to know the work of Johann Sebastian Bach, who was almost forgotten. He was a composer who was seen as this arcane older guy who'd died. And he was a master of counterpoint and the old forms, but we don't need to worry about that anymore, was what was the general consensus. Well, Baron van Swieten didn't agree with that consensus. He thought that the old music, the old Baroque style, contained all sorts of riches and magic. And he was right, of course. I mean, God bless Baron van Swieten, because he knew there were treasures out there. And he was an evangelist for this stuff. So he would interest younger composers, for example, Joseph Haydn and Mozart were invited to look at his collection. And in 1782, the year when this canon was written, and the year when all these things happened that I was telling you about, when Mozart came to live in Vienna, got married, and it was a very turbulent year. But in a letter to his father in 1782, he wrote to his dad to say, every Sunday I go to Baron van Swieten's house and look at all his manuscripts. And Baron van Swieten would invite him over, he'd look at all these manuscripts, play them, edit them, transcribe them for performances. So he was very, very busy at Baron van Swieten's house, in a sense researching Baroque music, and in particular discovering new riches in the work of Bach and Handel in particular. So it was this encounter that was a revelation to him, and he famously said of his encounter with J.S. Bach, at last I found a composer from whom I can learn something. A wonderful remark, because it's both cheeky and, of course, in a sense, reverential towards J.S. Bach. And why is all this important? Because, well, it led to a great enriching of Mozart's compositional style. He was already a master. He'd already written pieces like the Ninth Concerto I've mentioned, or Idomeneo, you know, these are miraculous pieces. But encountering Bach helped to deepen his style and led to, first of all, the production of lots of neo-Baroque pieces, many of which he didn't publish. He wrote a little Baroque suite, for example, and lots of fugues and canons and fantasias and sort of Baroque style things. It kind of interested him to engage with this older style. He started improvising fugues a lot more. And this canon belongs to that period when he was looking at probably Bach's musical offering, which is full of incredibly ingenious canon, and then thinking to himself, okay, I think I'll have a go at writing my own kind of difficult canonic exercise. I suspect that's what this canon is. Later in his life, he absorbed it, kind of digested all this amazing stuff, and then worked it into his regular compositions, so that by the late 1780s and the period leading up to his death, he's writing these magnificent pieces, like, for example, the Jupiter Symphony, where the finale is doing all kinds of amazing kind of fugal things and really intricate contrapuntal combinations, but within this sort of effortless symphonic style. It's really something to hear these late works of Mozart, where he's finding a perfect balance between his own compositional style and these more learned elements that he got from Bach. You get it in the Magic Flute too, where there are all sorts of beautiful things. There's a chorale prelude in it, for example, that's very much modelled on Bach. Or the overture, which is full of sort of fugal elements. So let me tell you about this Infinite Canon. The tune goes like this, and it's so wonderful because you hear this and you barely know it was a counterpoint exercise. It just sounds like a beautiful piece. But this is the basic material is this. Mozart wrote this tune. With this lovely offbeat suspension thing. The rhythm's so lovely. Right, that's the tune, isn't it? It's a beautiful tune in itself. Okay, so the first voice starts on a G, then to E, F. Do you see? It's like a descent. It's constantly in a state of descent. G, F, E, D. So it drops down 4 notes in effect in each bar. So you've got that sort of downward progression. Then the second voice comes in. And then the third voice comes in. And then the fourth voice comes in. It's difficult to play this. When I play in a minute, I'm going to do it, I'll probably overdub the lower two voices because it's quite hard to play all four voices. So let me just show you what's going on. First voice, second voice enters a tone lower. Do you see that? It starts on an F. So first voice started on G, second voice starts on an F. So the downward momentum is continuing. So it does that. Then the third voice comes in on an E, in other words, yet another tone below. So we've had G, F, then we got E, which is actually an octave and a tone because it's an alto voice. And Mozart may have intended this for string quartet. So that comes in on an E, and then the bass voice comes in on a D. So we've got G, F, E, D. And do you see how doing it that way means you've got to work out your counterpoint with each change of pitch coming in on a tone below. And the musical effect is that I mean, it's really hard to compose like that, but it's also, it draws the music down in this continual sort of circling motion down. And then as the bass moves in, starting on a D, then the top voice comes in again in counterpoint with it. Really a brilliant thing to do. So then all four voices are just circling in a perpetual cycle. And you just get this fabulous sort of, like the music of the spheres, like something that can go on for literally like a kind of musical heaven. Without more ado, I'm going to play it. Have a listen, see what you think.